Hey guys, welcome to the Remnant Radio. You're watching one of 19 episodes with Dr. Craig Keener, one of the preeminent Bible scholars on the planet, and we're talking about the Gospel of Mark.
This is going to be an exciting episode. The connections that Dr. Keener put together while we were with him at Asbury Seminary, phenomenal. But man, it was an expensive trip to get all of us out there to film this content. But we want to give it to you for free.
Well, we do want to give it to you for free, but one of the ways that you can help offset the cost for this is by purchasing our home group material. Dawson, our researcher, has put together this material. There's a leader's guide. There is a participant's guide. So you watch the video, you read the material, and then we walk you through. We have discussion questions that go along with it. Could be a huge blessing for you and your church.
Yeah, and this would be perfect for tons of different mediums. Maybe you're a pastor who's preaching through the Gospel of Mark, a home group leader, a Sunday school teacher. This would fit all of your needs. And if you want to pick this up, there's a link in the description for the home group material. In addition to that, maybe you're out there and you don't lead any kind of group like that. Maybe you just want to contribute as a thank you to what we've put together here on Remnant. There's PayPal descriptions in the link of this video if you would like to support us.
So absolutely, click those links in the description, hit that subscribe button, and please enjoy this video with Dr. Craig Keener.
I don't know if we're recording or not. Michaels, it's too late, guys. It is 1 a.m. here. We've been burning the candle at both ends, but we are going to finish out the Gospel of Mark right now. We're going to do chapter 15. We're doing chapter 16. We're finishing up these chapters with Dr. Craig Keener. If you haven't already, pause this video. Go watch the other videos. We're in the last chapter. It's a big spoiler alert on what happens in the Gospel of Mark, so make sure you go watch those other episodes and catch up into this one. Without further ado, we left in our last scene. If we were in Mark 15, Jesus is on the cross. Would you kind of lead up into that moment for us, catch people up?
Sure. Jesus has, he's been evading certain kinds of questions through the gospel and trying to evade popular crowds, raising suspicions among the leadership and so on. But at this point, he refuses to defend himself because his mission is to go to the cross. Now, at Passover, when it's going to make the most sense, he goes to the cross. He is hanging on the cross, and everybody's forsaken him. But the one who is always with him for all eternity, the Father, he now experiences abandonment from the Father.
Good.
Yeah, so he cries out, and we finished the last episode with that phrase. And then some people, they start thinking, he's calling on Elijah. Mm-hmm. Well, why do they think that?
Actually, it's even clearer in Matthew, where it's in Hebrew. Instead of Eloi, Eloi, it's Eli, Eli. Well, Eli sounds like Eliyahu, which is Elijah in Hebrew. Or actually, Elijah is Eliyahu in English. But anyway, Elijah was supposed to come back. Malachi chapter 3, Malachi chapter 4 in our English version. Malachi was supposed to come back before the great and notable day of the Lord. And Sirach, a pre-Christian Jewish work, also talks about Elijah coming and preparing the way. But there were also Jewish traditions about Elijah helping rabbis in distress. They made Elijah kind of an angel figure who would be sent on different errands by God to help rabbis. And so, they're mocking him, like, let Elijah come and help him. He claims to be this. Let's see if Elijah will come and take him down, because they think he's calling on Elijah. And the irony is, they've already killed Elijah. I mean, not these individuals, mm-hmm. but the establishment of that time has already killed Elijah, John the Baptist, and Elijah isn't there to hear.
So Jesus dies on the cross after this scene, and there's a moment where Mark records there's like this earthquake and the veil is torn in the temple. Again, anyone who's grown up in church has heard 6 sermons on this particular story. But tell us the significance of this from Mark's perspective.
Yeah, there are a couple major theories about this. There's the inner veil for the Holy of Holies, and then there's the outer veil, priestly sanctuary, which actually was huge. I mean, you could see it from outside Jerusalem. You couldn't see it from where the centurion was standing, even if his back hadn't been toward it. But you could see it from some places outside of Jerusalem. But whichever veil it was, Mark doesn't actually tell us. Mark doesn't tell us there's two veils. So we don't really, get that from him, the kataluma, which one it is. But a couple theories about it. One view is that it's the presence of God leaving the temple. So like what you have in Ezekiel, as God's presence leaves the Holy of Holies, leaves the temple, leaves Jerusalem, leaves the Mount of Olives, is God.
Ichabod scene.
Ichabod, which is, for 1 Samuel 3, I think, or something. No, not 3, 6, 5. Anyway, sorry, I'm not.
It's
you
okay.
See, I get,
it happened. I told him it was
Old
1 a.m.
Testament
It's
ones,
1 a.m.
I get some chapters off. But anyway,
It's okay.
I'm a New Testament scholar, but I should get at least the chapter right. My goodness. Anyway, so the other view is that it's judgment in the temple. Well, Jesus has already announced judgment in the temple. It's ripped from top to bottom, so clearly it's God doing it. Now, it could be both God's presence leaving the temple and judgment in the temple. I tend to think that way, that it is both. But the temple establishment is being judged. Jesus prefigured that in 11:15 through 17 with his action in the temple. He also announced it in 13:2 and 13:14 that this would happen. Eventually, there'd be a desolating sacrilege. Well, right now, this isn't the one he was talking about that's going to come within a generation, but this already prefigures that in that, well, what could be more sacrilege than the murder of God's own Son by a miscarriage of justice, by power-hungry people who were more interested in their own station than they were, in who this person really is, who's doing these miracles from God, and so on. Not that most of them had seen the miracles, but in any case, he doesn't actually do in Jerusalem. Well, actually, Matthew tells us he does, but Mark leaves those out. So the veil of the temple is rent, and the people have just been mocking him, among other things, for, you who are going to destroy this temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Well, guess what? There is going to be a new temple in 3 days. This temple isn't destroyed, but that's already a mark of the coming destruction of the temple. And actually, there are Jewish sources that talk about a generation before the destruction of the temple. You already have some prodigies, some omens, so to speak, prefiguring its destruction. Well, that's what we have here.
So you said there's a couple of prominent theories, and you gave the theory that the glory of God has left, the Spirit has left,
but
the Spirit
also,
has left the temple.
Yeah, but also it's a sign of judgment in the temple. But the rending of the temple evokes some other things. Mm-hmm. The schism, that language that's used, is used also very early in this gospel, in chapter 1 in verse 10. Where the heavens are rent, the heavens are torn, and then from the heaven, the Spirit comes like a dove. So some people have compared how Josephus says that the outer veil of the temple was all painted like the heavens, like the glory of the heavens. Mark may have known that, but I don't think his audience would have. So it's not something he's presupposing that we have to know. But God's presence came down from heaven after the heavens were rent. Now the veil of the temple, the place that's supposed to represent the presence of God, is rent as well. And there may be prefiguring of that in the narrative also, with the high priest rending his garment, saying blasphemy. Well, now the ultimate blasphemy has taken place with the death of God's Son. And Jesus also talking about the new patch in an old garment, how it's going to rend it. It's not meant to fit there. There's something new that has to come about.
But it seems conclusively with the kinds of interpretations you're giving, this is a judgment thing.
Yeah.
This isn't a, hey, we're in the glory, in the holy of holies, like it's been ripped and there's no longer a distinction. We're all priests. We have access to this place. Like that's the way I've heard it in the charismatic circles I've run in.
That's the other approach, and that's not wrong.
Okay.
You do have that in Hebrews.
Okay.
Where it talks about going within the veil. We're no longer separated from that, and of course you have all these passages. I mean, Ephesians talks about us having access. Romans 5 talks about us having access. So, I mean, that's also true. And maybe it's also rooted in this passage. That's the other view. And I don't think they're incompatible. I think both are possible. But the clear thing that he's been building up to is the idea of judgment. That's Mark's emphasis here, I believe.
That's helpful.
So when the centurion sees Jesus, he declares, like, truly this is the Son of God, which harkens the reader back to the very first chapter. Mm-hmm. This is the Son of God,
1:11,
right?
9:7.
So we've been talking about this from day one. What can be said about this that we haven't said already?
Notice that the centurion is said to be facing Jesus. And notice that when he says it, it says that he said this when he saw the death that Jesus died. You know, he can't see the temple being rent from where he is. I mean, Mark's audience doesn't know that, but it was the temple veil being rent. Mark's audience doesn't know that, but they don't know the geography, the topography, but they would know it from the fact that he's facing Jesus. He's not facing the temple. So, well, actually, they may not know which side of Jesus he's standing on, but anyway, it's this is what it says is how he knows this was the Son of God. I mean, there's some content already. He's heard the people mocking Jesus. Oh yeah, you're this. Come down from the cross. Save yourself. If you're really this person. He said he saved others, healing others, but he can't save himself. Well, it's true. He couldn't save himself if he was going to save us. So, let him come down from the cross, and posted right above him. I mean, a lot of people couldn't read, but usually they could read at least some things. And if he's a centurion, well, they usually work their way up the ranks. So, but we do have soldiers scrawling things and even writing things from different parts of the empire. So maybe most people couldn't read, but this guy, if nothing else, he can read at least King of the Jews on the cross. He's heard people talking about this. His own soldiers have been mocking Jesus as King of the Jews. Probably the execution squad would be maybe just like 4 people. That's all they needed for a detail like that. But the centurion would be in charge of it. So he's already heard all this. He's already taken all this in. But then he sees how Jesus died. Jesus cries out with a loud voice. Mark doesn't tell us what he cries out with the last thing that he cries out. And the centurion, unless he was a Syrian recruit, he probably wouldn't have understood Jesus' Aramaic earlier either. But whatever he cried out, people who are dying on the cross usually don't have, in their final breath, they don't have much left to cry out with. It might be a whimper, it might be breathing their last, which also it says, breathing out his spirit. John makes a play on words with that in John 19:30, I think it is. But he sees how Jesus died. And that's significant. The Father declares, this is my beloved Son. And you already may have a hint of the cross, the suffering servant, the sacrifice of Isaac back in Mark chapter 1 and verse 11. You don't necessarily have that in Mark 9:7, where the Father declares from heaven, this is my Son, hear him. But you do have Jesus talking about his passion in that connection. But here you have a human being, and a Gentile at that, recognizing Jesus' sonship, not because of his miracles, not because of his besting people in debate, not because of what he or anybody else claims that he is, but in the cross. And the last thing you would expect, the very antithesis of imperial power, people were expecting a Messiah to come and overthrow Rome. And instead, he comes and lets Rome crucify him with their ultimate punishment for revolutionaries. And he hasn't led a violent revolution.
And the Roman guy gets it.
And the Roman guy gets it, or the guy who's a representative of Rome gets it.
So Pilate finds out Jesus is dead, and it seems like he's surprised. Like, why is Pilate surprised that Jesus has died?
That's another significant thing about the death. I mean, there are other things that may have really gotten the centurion's attention. I mean, the darkness for 3 hours, we weren't expecting an eclipse. Maybe this is cloud cover. Yeah, the earthquake. Matthew elaborates on that a lot more. But Mark, Mark wants to keep the focus on what he's really writing this tract about, in a sense. He's writing about the cross and about discipleship entailing suffering. And don't be surprised that you guys have gone through this. God is still with you. You may have felt abandoned. Hey, look, your Lord went through that. Mm-hmm. And some of you may have failed the test. Mm-hmm. Hey, look, some of us went through that too. But Jesus was faithful to the end. And God has vindicated him, and God's going to be with you too. And yeah, but another factor, the one that you just brought up, is also unusual. People could linger on the cross for a few days. That's why it was death by slow torture. You would usually die of dehydration or blood loss. People say asphyxiation. If you lived long enough, you could die of asphyxiation because you couldn't keep lifting up your diaphragm. But often it took a few days to finish dying on the cross. And often if the cross was low enough, animals would come and start nibbling, maybe even before the person died. Birds coming, pecking the flesh off, dogs coming around the feet, biting to get some food. But Jesus died quickly, and Pilate is surprised by it, and the centurion may be impressed by it. Wow, he didn't just die. He chose to die. He had finished what he came to do, and he gave up his spirit. And he still had enough breath left in him to have a final outcry, a loud cry.
Wasn't the scourging a death penalty as well?
You could be scourged to death, but...
Not necessarily.
But no, everybody would be scourged before they were executed.
I didn't know that.
At least to some degree. They'd strip them naked.
Okay.
So talking about, actually we talked about people abandoning their cloaks. Jesus actually ends up having to give up his cloak, but he gives up his willingly for God's mission.
Wow.
So we also have the women that stay with Jesus to the bitter end.
Yeah.
That's got to be significant.
1540 and 41. Yeah, it is significant. And Mark hasn't mentioned them. Mark again wants to mention discipleship failure. But here are some who haven't failed. They've stuck with him to the end. Now, it was safer for them to get near the cross. And it would be safer for relatives, especially women relatives, than it would be for male disciples who might be considered a threat. Oh, we recognize you. You were with him. You're one of his disciples too, aren't you? So there is that factor. But I think Mark also wants to emphasize, here we have, all the other heroes let us down. Here now we have some heroes. They've been faithful. And so, he gets our hopes up with these women. And also that, think of how the Passion narrative opens with this faithful woman who anoints Jesus. And think of also Peter's mother. That's not Peter's mother. Peter's mother-in-law, who they did have mother-in-law jokes back then. I didn't tell you that. Aristophanes used that, but also you were supposed to respect your mother-in-law. So
I wonder why.
Is your mother, if we're going to tell her to watch this.
Oh, she's going to watch this. This is probably the only episode in 3 years she watches.
Don't worry, it's the last one. She had to put up with all the others.
I've got an amazing mother-in-law. She's awesome.
Yes, that's what you should say. Yes.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
The jokes come after we stop recording.
Yeah, that's right. No, my mother-in-law really was amazing. But Peter's mother-in-law, she gets up and serves them. That was normal domestic expectations for women in that culture. But the serving him becomes a model. Jesus it uses that same language for him in 1045, and now it's used for these women who were serving him. And Luke gives us more detail. They were actually supporting him out of their means. Some of them had more means. They were people of some wealth, but Mark isn't going to emphasize that part. So they're doing the role of a disciple. They're following, even to the cross. I mean, they didn't take up their cross to follow him, but they're doing better than the male disciples. They're not in hiding somewhere. And that's really great. Mm-hmm. So we have somebody we can look to, we think.
But wait, there's more. Okay, so, and we're going to pick that up probably in 16. Think of a sandwich here that's coming later. We're gonna come back to that here in a second.
In between.
But Joseph of Arimathea comes next. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus dies on the cross. They're surprised. He passes. But Joseph of Arimathea seems to muster up courage. Why does he need to muster up courage to go get Jesus?
Well, anybody who respected, I think it's Deuteronomy 21, would realize that you're not allowed to let bodies hang on crosses overnight. People were to be buried very quickly. Mm-hmm. And so this is a good, respectful thing for a Sanhedrist to do. But normally, people, in the Roman world, the bodies could just be let there to rot.
As a warning.
Sign for everybody. Yeah, as a warning for everybody. But that was not the Jewish custom. The Jewish custom, which Pilate would need to respect, I mean, especially if he's going to hand the guy over to them, he's also going to have to respect this biblical custom. This isn't even the later tradition. So, but the way the tradition was carried out, if somebody was executed by a Jewish court, they'd be put in a common criminal's grave. But they didn't lose track of them because after a year it would be handed over to the family. But Joseph doesn't hand him over to a criminal's grave. Joseph actually gives him a decent burial, which of course fits Isaiah 53:12, I think it is. He'll be with a rich man in his death or whatever. Well, actually, Mark doesn't specify it's his own tomb, but how else is he going to get a tomb that fast in the area? So, anyway.
So there's one scholar.
Sorry. I forgot to answer your question. Why is he scared to do this? Because that wouldn't have made him scared. And it's not just he's nervous. Oh, I'm going to meet the great governor. This is Joseph of Arimathea. He's a member of the Sanhedrin. So he comes before him. Now, if you ask for a body and you're a family member, it's up to the governor. They can grant it or not, but often they'll grant it. And especially if Pilate, didn't really think Jesus was guilty anyway. But, Joseph doesn't know that, what Pilate was thinking. But Joseph isn't a family member. And for Joseph to ask that is publicly identifying with somebody who's just been executed on the charge of high treason against the majesty of the emperor. King of the Jews. That's the charge of treason, because remember what we said about Herod Antipas. He said, Could I please become king? Oh, you're banished. So, and that was a high-level aristocrat. So Jesus has been executed for treason. If you're following him, and you're still following him after he's been executed, you're coming out publicly, or at least in front of the governor, and saying, I really respected that guy. And again, he's not asking for a criminal's burial. He wouldn't, that would probably be standard practice. So he's, when he asks for when he asks Pilate for the body, he's publicly identified, and don't think his riches would protect him, because governors loved to pin charges on rich people so they could execute them and confiscate their property. Yeah. So, we finally find a rich guy who made it through a camel's, like a camel through the needle's eye.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, John the Baptist wears a camel's hair. He's ready to be martyred, but he wasn't rich. But this guy makes it through the eye of a needle.
Way to go, Joseph.
Yeah.
Way to go.
So I'm going to go ahead and skip down to chapter 16 because we're running short on time. I want to make sure we finish this. So at the very beginning of chapter 16, Mary goes and she anoints Jesus. Is anointing the dead a common practice?
Are you conflating that with the anointing in chapter 14 where one person anoints him? They don't find him there to anoint in chapter 16 because his body isn't there anymore. but they're going for
But they're
the
going
purpose.
to anoint.
They're going
they're
for
going
the
for the
purpose.
purpose.
Of
Sorry, that's what I
anointing.
meant to say.
Yeah.
I was like, you got me.
It
It's
is
1
after
a.m.
1.
I'm
Yeah.
tired.
So okay, yeah, I have the advantage of being a night person, but you guys have time zone advantage in this. But anyway, so
Home field advantage, time field advantage.
they're going to for the purpose of anointing him, but they're like, who's gonna roll away the stone? And these stones, well, there were different kinds of tombs, but a lot of the tombs in the area around Jerusalem, they would be caves, or sometimes they were humanly made caves, artificial caves, and they could be sealed with a stone. And usually it was more square, but this one is a rolling one, so it's probably circular in shape. Those were rare, which actually probably also testifies it's a fairly well-to-do tomb. Well, rather than just tossing the body in the dirt, this is a significant thing. Family tomb, and since Joseph was from Arimathea, it's probably fairly new and not used much yet. And yeah, so but it turns out that the stone is not going to be a problem.
Yeah, there's a dude sitting on the stone.
Well, that's in Matthew.
He's not sitting on the stone. There's a guy out there wearing white.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's sitting inside the tomb.
There you go.
But the real cornerstone is already. Yeah. Anyway,
he's already.
Let me not.
Sort of left the building.
Sometimes we try to do this theologically, but sometimes it's
too exciting.
It's a pun. So I'm trying to do it theologically. It might be relevant, and then again, it's probably not. So anyway, we'll see.
And this is the good part. No, so they're coming out. They see a guy. He's clothed in white. Is this an angel?
Yeah.
Okay. How do we know that?
I mean, well, Mark doesn't tell us that, but based on what you expect from a scene like this in Jewish tradition and in the Old Testament, and who is this who already knows all about this? It's pretty clearly an angel. That's certainly how
Mark's got a message, obviously.
Earliest interpreters took it. Matthew, Luke, and John may be going a little bit differently with it, but certainly his earliest interpreters took it this way. Now, I think I said before I said if you asked me, I would say something about the site.
Yeah, well, that was my next question, actually.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I didn't know, did you have more to say on the site? Because you talked already about it being a rich man's tomb, so.
Oh, no, I was going to say that we probably know pretty close to the original site today.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, some people have made a big deal of the stone that the builders rejected, and that Golgotha, where we think now Golgotha is actually the site of an ancient quarry. But so there may have been another play on that. But that's, Mark's audience wouldn't have known that, and I don't know how widely that was known back then. But something else that's very clear with this, that the New Testament is clear that Jesus was executed and buried outside the city walls. And that's where it was supposed to be done. People were supposed to be executed and buried outside the city walls. And yet, the traditional site of the tomb is within the city walls of Jerusalem. So what kind of idiot would have made up this, knowing that he's supposed to be buried outside the city walls? Everybody's supposed to be buried outside the city walls. I mean, there's a story, it may not be a true story, but a story of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who pretends to be a dead body, so that his disciples are saying, okay, you revolutionaries, you have to let us out of Jerusalem because we're holy people, we have to bury this outside the city. And so they take him out, and then he jumps off the stretcher, and they all run and surrender to the Romans. But burials were supposed to be outside the city. However, when Agrippa I was king of Judea from the years 41 to 44, he expanded the walls of Jerusalem. And there's some debate archaeologically, but it really looks like, and this seems to be the majority view from the archaeological excavations, Jesus was buried outside the city walls in the year 30. But
those walls.
by 41 to 44, it's inside the city walls. So that tradition seems to go back to within a decade of Jesus' burial.
Do you think that has any significance? I mean, we didn't.
Well, yeah. I mean, it means that the tradition about Jesus' death and resurrection, goes back really early. And actually also the site, some people say, well, Helena said it's this tomb, Constantine's mother, and she got it in a vision. But it is interesting. You do the archaeology, you dig down to where the site is. These, unlike the Garden Tomb, Gordon's Calvary, this is a site of tombs from exactly the right period, and people of Joseph of Arimathea's social class. So, and it's close to the place where people could be executed. So, it makes it really fits. We have very early tradition of the site of Jesus' execution.
So we talked about this in the last chapter. The women, it looks like they've stayed to the end.
We're
Way to go. But so two things. How does the Gospel of Mark end? Because this is the ending part.
Okay. If it ended with verse 7, we'd be really happy.
Yeah.
Because in verse 7, it says, they're given a commission. Go tell the disciples and Peter that Jesus is risen and he'll meet you in Galilee. So, Mark doesn't have to end with resurrection appearances like the other Gospels do. He's writing first. There was no tradition that you have to write a Gospel ending with resurrection appearances. It's the beginning of the Gospel. He knows, and everybody knows who's a believer. They already know, the basic Gospel story from 1 Corinthians 15. Jesus died for our sins. He was buried. He rose, was raised the third day according to the Scriptures. And he was seen by this witness, these witnesses, and so on. So the resurrection appearances are actually, part of the gospel that was being narrated right from the start. Mark doesn't have to go into that. He's giving you the backstory. So he can finish real quickly. Like again in the Passion movie, you just get this final glimpse at the end. Well, Mark kind of does that. But then he doesn't end with verse 7. Verse 7 is really great. It's like, okay, Jesus said he'd be ashamed of them. They're all going to, they forsook him. They're through. No. Here's a message to the disciples and Peter. He gets singled out. And Peter's certainly grateful for that. And we know again from Paul that and from John that Peter gets his own resurrection appearance as well. Not from John, from Luke 24. But having said all that, it doesn't end with verse 7.
Yeah.
It goes on to verse 8. And verse 8, it's like, what kind of ending is that? I mean, you could end at verse 7 and, if it's the first gospel, nobody's going to expect you to end differently. But verse 8, who's going to end with an ending like verse 8? That's really strange.
Yeah, what's up with that? Why does he mention them running off scared and sort of leaves it with that?
Oh, wow, you're giving away what verse 8 is about.
Huh.
Yeah. So these women are so, they've been faithful to the end. They didn't flee when persecution came. But now, all the way through the gospel, the message has been, don't tell anybody. Keep this under wraps. But now you're supposed to tell everybody. So go tell his disciples, he's going to meet you in Galilee. And that's already been predicted that that's going to be fulfilled. So it's fulfilled. Mm-hmm. And the women are going to deliver the message.
Yeah.
But Mark says, and they went away scared and didn't tell anybody. What kind of ending is that? What kind of trick is Mark playing on us? After he's built up our expectations, and here are the heroes, and they fail. And they don't fail at the cross. They fail because they're freaked out that Jesus is risen. He's been telling them he's going to do it. But, you can't blame them for being scared. But they abandon. I mean, they flee. It's the same word for flee is used for the male disciples earlier. And so nobody deserves it. Jesus is the only real hero. The women do better than the men. But, Jesus is the only real hero of the story. And now you're going to ask?
Okay, that's obviously we have to get to the textual variant, but we have to, right? Because people are go, wait a second, my Bible, you said it said 8, like what translation are you using? I got another page back here.
Yeah, then it starts to get really weird.
So we definitely need to talk about that, but like walking through this with you, I do not put Paul in an entirely separate category because Paul was a bad guy and the apostles are good guys. Right. And he came in late and he's like, oh, I'm going to be a good guy now. And it's like, oh, that's a great reformed story. But like after walking through the Gospel of Mark with you, I'm like, geez, Louise, like,
yeah, they were all bad guys.
They're a dime a dozen. These guys. No, all these guys stink.
And the point you just made about the women there at the end, I mean, they lose as well.
Jesus didn't choose elites.
Come on.
He chose ordinary people, just like all of us.
So that
and if we pretend not to be ordinary, we're pretending, because in God's sight, we're just flesh and blood. We're just dust and ashes. But we are loved by God, who gave his son to redeem us to himself. He wasn't, he never lowered the standard. This is what it means to be my disciple.
Yeah.
But when they failed, he didn't give up on them. And we know the end of the story. And it's the same with us, because Jesus is patient. He's loving. He'll reprove us. But he'll take people like these disciples and he'll make them into what he called them to be.
Yeah.
He said, follow me. I will make you fishers of people.
So Mark ends just saying, hey, they're not faithful. And then you kind of just assume that the focus turns towards the reader, and it's like, now what are you going to do about it? Like,
if Jesus promised, I will make you guys fishers of people, he can make us something too.
Okay, well, I mean, it would be really nice for there to be this passage where Jesus is like, hey, if you believe in my name and, these signs will follow, like speaking specifically to the audience. It would be really convenient for there to be a moment where he addresses the audience who's now reading the book and turns away from the narrative. And many people actually have that in their Bible, right? You're cracking up because it's like, it would be convenient. But you're saying that's not how it ends.
And remember, Mark loves riddles. He loves Jesus' riddles.
Mm-hmm. The whole thing is a parable.
The whole thing, a true parable, yes. And it ends basically with a question to us. Like, what kind of disciple are you going to be? Are you going to pick up this message that Jesus is risen, that he is the king in the kingdom of God, that Jesus is Lord, and spread it to the nations? Because this gospel will be preached in the whole world as a testimony. And Jesus says that in 13:10. He says it also in chapter 14. And we're part of that mission, that ongoing mission. But we know it because it's predicted in Mark, not because it's narrated. Mm-hmm. I mean, his second coming is also predicted and not narrated, but we know it's going to happen.
All right. So since this is the final episode and the camera is still rolling, I'm going to pull a slight audible.
Uh-oh.
Closing thoughts. We do that in almost every podcast. I'd like to get all of our closing thoughts on this.
Oh, we've got to talk about the textual variant before we get to closing thoughts.
Yeah.
Like, why is the textual variant?
Well, it gives you little time to think about it.
Okay. We'll do closing thoughts after it. Okay. So, textual variant, explain that to us. You're saying that it's over at verse 8, but, if you're not holding a King James Bible, you've got extra verses.
No, if you are holding a King James Bible, you have extra verses.
I'm sorry.
If you're
everything else
Bible,
has it in brackets.
The King James Bible doesn't have it in brackets. I don't know why I said that. Yeah. That's exactly what I meant. Yeah.
The other ones have a marginal note. I mean, the King James is translated. I mean, they did the best in 1611 they could. I may make some people mad here, but I'm sorry. The truth. I mean, yeah. What have we been talking about?
This is going to mess up with our Pentecostal friends.
Well, at least the snake handling ones.
Yeah.
Well, we are in Kentucky.
Hey, don't make fun of us. Hey, we're near Lexington. Anyway, but yeah, a lot of people, once the other gospels are in circulation, they're like, well, this is not the proper way to end the gospel. And so you have an appendix added, probably in the 2nd century. So it's fairly early. And it's, so people who have it in their Bible, actually pretty much everything it says is is incorporated from other gospels. So it's not like false teaching or something. People have used it for centuries, and it's been, it hasn't hurt them usually, except for the snake handlers. I think there'll be some snake handlers that'll get to heaven and they'll be like, "Whoa, I did all that and there was a textual variant." But anyway, but it's not in the earliest manuscripts. It's not in Mark's style, which can be subjective, but in this case, it's pretty clear. And it doesn't fit the way Mark narrates or argues. It's a compilation of stuff from the other Gospels. So, and I think almost all text critics are agreed on this, that this isn't in the earliest version. Certainly, well, I mean, Dan Wallace, Gordon Fee, leading evangelical text critics. And
Gordon Fee
is
of the
Pentecostal.
Charismatic ones. Yeah, that's right.
So, this is pretty much the consensus among scholars.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say there's nobody who holds this, and I wouldn't say somebody's stupid for holding a different view. There are early manuscripts that say this, but it's a whole lot easier to explain why it was added than to explain why it would be left out.
And there's lots of questions on, is it actually scripture? Is it true? But those are questions probably for another day.
And the earliest manuscripts don't have it. As far as true,
it is true.
Well, it's taken from other gospels, mostly. Except for if you believe, you'll pick up, you'll drink deadly poison and you'll take up serpents and stuff like that. But it wasn't. I don't think the point of it was you're supposed to show your faith by drinking poison and things like that. But just
providential protection and such. Yeah. Okay, closing thoughts.
Should we get Michael over here?
Okay, first of all, cut to this guy. Let him give his closing thoughts. You can switch seats with me.
There we go.
There you go. You go.
I like
go ahead.
that.
Go ahead.
Okay, so when you mentioned that last little bit about the women also fleeing scared, that reminded me a lot of something my mentor has said over the years, that we're all always trying to portray the image of a holy person that doesn't exist. And us being very honest and very authentic with ourselves, we can relate to those women. We can relate to those disciples. If anything, we probably would fail just as bad, if not worse. That is, I think, a very sobering part of Mark's gospel, and I'm super thankful for you pulling that inside out.
We can grow into something else, but Jesus didn't come to save the righteous. He came to save sinners.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway for me is this ongoing theme in Mark that Jesus is not just the Messiah, he's a completely different kind of Messiah than what you expected, a completely different kind of king. And that if you're going to follow after him, that means everything. And we want the power, but we don't want the persecution.
Yeah.
And power that can be, if you're charismatic, signs and wonders power. Or it can mean take dominion and political power, and we can go in lots of tangents, or it can just be we're pastors in churches. I want to be the celebrity pastor kind of power. I want to be rich, prosperity gospel type power. It has so many manifestations today of Christians emphasizing strength, success, eloquence, position, wealth. All the things the world emphasizes, but we baptize it in spiritual language and call it God's blessing, etc. And hey, I get it. Proverbs 10:22, it is the blessing of the Lord that adds wealth, and he has no trouble to it. If there is success, God gave me success, but what am I going for? I'm going for Jesus.
Yeah.
King Jesus, crucified Jesus, which means when he calls me to be with him, I want to be with him on the way to the cross. I want to be where Simon of Cyrene is, walking with him,
carrying the cross
to Golgotha.
Amen.
Yeah. One thing that we didn't mention is the fact that yes, everybody fails, but then they also succeed later.
Yes.
And that's the big thing, is they do overcome under their dying breath.
Jesus makes them into something else, and he's making us into something else.
Which is that the righteous man falls 7 times, but gets back up.
Yes.
I love it. Closing thought would be, this is not a story about the disciples. It's not a story about a bunch of people who failed. It's a story about Jesus who conquered, right? Because the whole overarching meta-narrative of the Old Testament is the prophets failed, the priest failed, the kings failed. They failed. And then we see all of those manifest in the persons, the side plot characters of the Gospel of Mark, but Christ remains victorious. He is the Christ. He is the Messiah, the coming King, and he wins. And he succeeds in the areas that the prophets, the priests, the kings have failed. So awesome story. Jesus is the hero. It's a good win. Dr. Keener, what would your takeaway moment be if you said there's one little thing that, man, this is I'm asking you basically for your thesis statement on Mark. I mean,
well, the thesis statement has been there already. Maybe
There you
a different kind of closing thought.
okay.
The second century church thought of Mark as Peter's memoirs. I think they were right about that. And I think these are the memoirs of somebody who, as a guy in his late teens, or probably in his case early 20s, he's thinking back and he's remembering, man, I failed him so much, but he was so faithful.
Come on.
Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. And I met him, and I have his story to tell.
I hope you've enjoyed that episode on the Gospel of Mark with Dr. Craig Keener. If you want to go back and watch former episodes that we've done, there's a playlist right here, or you can watch the very next chapter, which will be listed right here. If you've been blessed by this episode or other episodes we've done, consider giving. There are links in the description.